and welcome. I'm Michael Egel, General and Artistic Director for Des Moines Metro Opera. I'm happy to welcome you here today for our event as part of our 2020 virtual festival, produced in partnership with Iowa PBS. Antonin Dvorak is a name that is familiar to many of us in Iowa because of the composer's famous summer sojourn up in Spillville in 1893. Though he is perhaps best known for his instrumental chamber and piano music, his opera Rusalka has been performed on stages around the world with increasing frequency. It's a tragic love story with a lush score and a showcase for a marvelous group of singers and performers. I'm pleased to say that we assembled a remarkable group back in 2018 when this opera had its long-awaited premiere in Iowa. Today I'm happy to be here catching up with this incredible cast of Rusalka, reminiscing about the special experience. And I have to say personally, I've been able to relive this production by watching the clips in recent weeks preparing for this virtual festival. What a group you all were. Those that I see here before me today and those that are joining us in spirit, I can't wait to share your work and the special production with an even broader audience. But we're glad you're here with us today. And I'll start by introducing you each one at a time and then asking you a question about your role and your experience with the production. It's only natural that we would begin with our Rusalka and soprano Sara Gartland. Sara, this role is so iconic, and of course this character has the famous Song to the Moon, which happens within the first few minutes of the opera. Can you talk a little bit about what it's like to sing this famous aria in this amazing role?
Oh, thank you, Michael. This role, the role of Rusalka, is just, she lives very close to my spirit. I adore singing her. I've been blessed to sing her 3 times now. My favorite time really there in Iowa and for everyone there. The Song to the Moon, everyone knows the Song to the Moon, even if you haven't seen the opera. So there's a lot of pressure when singing that, but it's perfectly placed in the opera. The first time you get to hear her sing about the prince and how much she loves him and longs for him and wishes for him to know her because he can't, because she lives in the water. And I love it. It's become my favorite audition aria. It's my favorite aria to sing at different events. And it's just fantastic. I don't know, everything about the role from start to finish is special for me. Her arc is special, the way it ends in Act 3, and what Maestro Neely and I were able to do with the fantastic way our theater is there in Des Moines to set the mood in Act 3 was amazing. If I only had to choose one role to sing for the rest of my life, it would be Rusalka.
Evan LeRoy Johnson, our tenor, our prince. Evan, you play one of the only human characters in this fairy tale story with Rusalka. Let's talk about the prince and his love for Rusalka. Is it a genuine love or is it an infatuation?
I do think it's some sort of love. I think there are a lot of different kinds of love in the world. I guess this particular production for me, the prince is intrigued and drawn into this entity, this magical person that he's never experienced in his princely life in the castle, and so it's that much more inviting. Thinking back on the production, I was trying to revisit what made this production so special, and what I came up with was the proximity to the audience. Really brought this intimate setting to it. And from the prince's perspective, I like to think of this opera as him coming up to the edge of a pool and looking in. And the rest is, the rest is history and magic that happens after that. But just from a visual standpoint, the way that Des Moines Opera is set up, to me, it looks a little bit like exactly like a pond with the deep part being where Maestro is. And so just the audience being at the very edge of that, looking in, I think really just draws them in. And it's similar to the Prince in that it's not really a choice of his. It's as soon as he sees her, as soon as he's around it, there's nothing he can do to stop it. So whether it's calculated love, I'm not so sure. I think it's very physical and emotional and just a whirlwind for him.
How does this part differ from some of the more conventional Italian and French heroes that you sing in other repertory?
Like all tenor roles, he's troubled. I like to think that in this opera, he's a little bit more redemptive, at least at the end, and tries to do the right thing. Whereas some roles that I've sung, like José, it doesn't end so well. But the music of the Prince is so interesting because it contrasts the rest of the cast in that he's kind of more the human side of the worlds, and so I guess it's interesting to watch his lines match other parts of the opera, whereas in some of the other Italian French repertoire, it kind of stays relatively similar. As I feel the musical styles in Rusalka are so differing between the human world and the magic world. So I think that's what makes this particular show special.
I'd like to introduce now our Jezibaba, our witch, mezzo-soprano Jill Grove, who made her debut with us in this role in 2018, but has since come back to charm our audiences in other roles as well. You seem to be having so much fun with this role, and not only does it suit you so beautifully vocally, but you just seem to be having a great time. Is it as much fun to sing as it looks like? Are you having as good a time as it looks like you're having when you take on this role?
Yes, it is. It is a very fun role to sing. That is one of the really great parts about a lot of the roles that I sing. I can always find a little bit of humor in a lot of the things that I sing, even though they're dark. That's a very fun thing for me. But this role particularly, like Sara, I think I could sing this role all the time. I love it. It's different. I've done the production maybe 3 or 4 times now, Des Moines absolutely being one of my favorites. And there are so many ways to play it. You can play it completely straight. You can play it completely out of your mind. She can be very duplicitous. She can do whatever you want. So it's just full of all the magic and all the things that her character is.
Our Vodník, Rusalka's father, bass Zachary James, who was singing, I think, his second role with us that summer. One of the things that I'm struck by in watching your performance is the movement vocabulary that you developed as part of this role. Not only, especially the aria in Act 2, and watching you work your way through that with the dancers in the scenes where you can't be seen by the human characters. Can you tell us a little bit about how you physically became Vodník in this production and the movement vocabulary that you developed to inhabit this role?
Sure. Well, it was such a special production and a special working environment. Chaz, the director, said on the first day that there was no point in being together and doing this if we weren't going to have joy for the entire period that we were together. So it was such a wonderful way to begin, just with this joy and exploration. And we, being a fantastical kind of mythical world and these mythical creatures, there's kind of no rules. So you can go to fun places and no one can say, well, that's wrong, because no one knows what, how a water sprite might move. So it was just really fun to kind of push the boundaries and see what we could get away with and how, choreographed we could go within an opera while still, of course, honoring the score.
Finally, I'd like to introduce Maestro David Neely, who's our principal conductor and music director at Des Moines Metro Opera. Maestro, I want to ask you about Dvorak. The orchestra really seems to revel in this music that we don't often get to hear in the opera house. Can you describe what it was like for you and for the musicians to play this music and to present it for our audiences?
It was extremely memorable performing this piece, thanks to the genius of Dvorak, also thanks to your beautiful performing skills. Like Michael, I've been reviewing the clips leading up to our broadcast, and I don't really get to experience it visually the way the audience does, and I look forward to having that. But your performances and the nuance, and not just having beautiful voices, but the nuanced, expressive and dedicated performances from all of you, what I have seen and what I experienced in the room through the whole process was extraordinary. And the orchestra in the pit, we're not seen by most people in the audience, but there was a very special energy and dedication to purpose during Rusalka through all the performances. And a lot of that has to do with just the overall spirit that was in the score and in this production, but also tribute to our musicians, who are not only extremely talented, but also artists. They're simply artists. And the score of Rusalka is symphonic in nature. In fact, one of our orchestra members described it like that. It's like we get to play a 2.5-hour symphony, and it's wonderfully imaginative and expressive. And is well written for the orchestra. It's challenging, but it lays well. It's gratifying to play. The orchestration is phenomenal. And I think everybody, for every performance, I felt an electricity in the space, every performance.
I want to turn the question a little bit over to Sara, too. You do a wide variety of repertory of all styles and in all languages, but we here at Des Moines Metro Opera have been able to hear you in 2 Czech roles. And it's just amazing to listen to how well that music fits in your voice. Do you feel a special affinity for that music and that language?
I love singing in Czech. It's very Italian. Really, in the vowels, not necessarily in the structure of the consonants, but it's similar. I would sing in Czech all the time. There's lots of Czech repertoire I'd like to try on at some point down the road. So I love to sing it. I don't know. I used to have an account on Ancestry.com, and I actually think that there's an ancestor somewhere that's Czech, and maybe there's a drop of blood in me that it just fits in there somehow. But it's like a glove. Other languages I struggle with so much more to make them clear and make them sound like their language, but Czech is awesome.
I just wanted to say, Dvořák, I think, has a way of making us all feel Czech, whether we are or not.
He makes it very easy, Also, the way he writes, yes, you have the text, but the way he writes the line, you can't help but sound beautiful and sound so very Czech. I think, too, I was really lucky that my first Czech role ever was Janufa, and there you had Janáček, who wrote in a speaking way the text and the music. So, and there was a lot more difficult Czech in that role than in Rusalka. So I actually think to have studied that role first and have that as my foundation helped when I was studying Rusalka the first time. It just was so much more easy because Rusalka is so poetic. And if you have the structure of the Janáček, then you can, it's Czech, but it's different. It's very different. It's so poetic that if you have a good foundation, you can just go, you can fly.
I'm in awe of you all, not only having to learn this music, memorize it, perform it, and then have to sing in Czech. Zach or Jill, what were some of the challenges, the things that you've had to overcome in learning to perform in Czech? Now, today singers are expected that that's just a language that we gravitate into, is the same as Italian and French and German. Czech is added to that. But was it hard to develop those skills, and were there any challenges that you had to overcome in learning to sing in Czech?
I would say just the added pressure of filming it, actually, because you really want to get it right when it's preserved for eternity, and knowing that there are native speakers coming, and many did. And so we just really wanted to get it right.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Being, all of these languages are foreign to especially a Texan. And so, I can't say that Czech's any more difficult than Italian or French to me, but I think, wanting to get it right, knowing it was being filmed, knowing that there was such a huge population there, you want to really, anytime, you want to really grab on to the nuances of the language as much as possible, even though it's not what's in our ear. So I definitely had to do just a lot of listening to Czech speakers, whether it was just some podcast that I certainly didn't understand, but at least I had some sort of cadence in my ear for the language, much less the rules, and all the actual physical sounds aren't that challenging, but just the cadence and the stresses of the language and stuff, I think you just want to put that little extra touch on it as much as possible.
So this opera is a fantasy. It's a fairy tale. These are not necessarily regular characters on the street like you might encounter in La Boheme. And each time a character comes on stage, we meet someone new. It's really somebody fantastical and mythical in some ways. What was that like with you, with each of you working with other cast members and interacting with each other on stage as magical, mythical beings? How is that different from being a human character on a Paris street corner?
It's the most fun, when there aren't rules and you get to go to fun, exciting places that we don't get to go to necessarily in real life. But my main scene partner was Sara, my daughter in the opera. And it was just so luxurious to connect with each other emotionally and musically, and just had the best time, I think. I'm going to brag and say one of the reviews said she sings it better than anyone else in the world, and it's very true. And just to be wrapped up in that on stage, every performance was such a gift.
We're getting to sing, even though they're not real, the emotions that they have, everybody has them. And so even if you're a fantastical character, you can just be in the emotion of it, and it listening to your colleague gloriously sing next to you is, a treat, no matter if we're in outer space, in a pond, or on a street corner in Paris.
My scene person was Sara most of the time. And, just to find, even though, Jezibaba is certainly a fantastical character and a mythical creature, finding the humanness of it and finding just the relationship and the communication between the two of us, whether it was adversarial, whether it was maternal, whether it was sort of cat and mouse, a little bait and switch, whatever it was that she was doing, it's all rooted in kind of our understanding of human nature. And so it's amazing. It's great. It's great.
I want to talk a little bit about the stamina required for some of these parts, particularly as it relates to the Prince and to Rusalka. Evan, how do you pace yourself for an evening-length opera like this, where you're on stage for so much of it, oftentimes by yourself, singing for very long periods of time? How do you prepare for that personally?
Well, as the tenor, I'm very fortunate that Dvorak wrote in some really, really nice breaks. The way it's paced for the first act is really set up well for his big aria, and then into the second act, he gets a nice part in the middle where Rusalka has to take over all the work. So it's actually not too bad. It's more of an emotional preparation, I think, in some ways. To if I can go back to our last question too, as the human side of things, to be the human in this fantastical world, and to actually see your colleagues on stage, and they look, very magical, and not the same kind of costume that I'm wearing, but in my mind, I was also trying to not see them as that, and try and see them as perhaps how the prince was seeing them, which is just constantly making up what I'm seeing and what's real and what's not real. And so I think that's kind of how I experienced it on stage, which is that I was having so much fun with my colleagues, but also just kind of trying to connect with this wandering, constantly seeking feeling of the prince.
Sara, Rusalka is a very long role. There's certainly breaks written in, but she's on stage through most of this, interacting with one or another of the characters, sometimes in pairs. And how do you prepare for that role? How do you work in your day to get ready to sing a role like that over the course of an evening?
Oh my gosh. Well, for those that don't know, I am a mom, and I have, well, at that time he was 2.5. Now he's 4.5. So the organizing of my performance day looks very different now than it did pre-child, where I would be like very quiet and, meditating, and it looks very different now. And she is a sing. It is a 3-hour sing. 3 arias. It's difficult. And in this production, I was wearing a corset in acts 2 and 3, which adds a whole other level of complications and also awesomeness, because I try to center myself in my breathing, and a corset can help with that if you don't try and fight it too much. But I just have to stay in my body, think about my breath, and use the motivations, the feelings, everything Rusalka's going through to inform what I'm doing on stage. And I think if I stay true to that, I can get from A to Z within the 3 hours. And it's when I start to think about things that are not involved in the singing of the role that it can kind of go off the track. But the days of lounging around on a performance day are long gone.
I'd like to wrap up our time together by asking you to each about what you've been doing since Rusalka. This is the most recent of our broadcasts from our virtual festival season, recorded in 2018. So less time has passed since then. But Zach, I know we've seen you recently here in Des Moines in a one-person Broadway show that was deeply meaningful and filled with pieces that were special to you, and then therefore made special to the audience. Do you want to talk a little bit about that production you've crafted and how you've been able to take that around to audiences across the country?
Yeah, sure. I kind of put together a solo show about my time on Broadway and kind of having a dream and pursuing it as a kid. And it was very special to bring it to Des Moines and all the places I've been able to bring it. But I have to say the Des Moines audience was the best ever and totally packed. And it was so special, kind of a homecoming for me.
Evan, you have been a number of places since we saw you just 2 years ago. In fact, you've sung this piece in other places. What have been some highlights for you since your appearance in 2018 here?
Well, I had a great summer last summer in Glyndebourne singing Rusalka again and getting to do this lovely piece of music 11 more times. It was really cool to do 2 back-to-back productions a year apart, and to come back to the role and a little bit more comfortable with the Czech the second time. And, but also just to see that this opera can really just be amazing, but in very personal, specific ways to the cast you're working with and the production that you get worked into. And really there couldn't be more differences in some ways. And it was really cool to think back as I was working on this new, the new Rusalka, I guess you could say, to think of all these fond memories I had working with all of you, and picturing myself back in Des Moines, and lots of good memories.
Jill, what have you been up to in the time? I know we saw you last summer, but I know you've been in lots of places and done many things. That have been some highlights for you.
I have. I've been able to add a few new roles to as I get older, I think as a mezzo, roles just keep opening up more and more. I've added, the old prioress from Carmelites. I had the old lady from Candide, also the Queen of Spades, and it's just been really remarkable. I love this production. I love this cast. And even though when you watch it, there's so much stuff going on, there's so much with the set. And there's so much with all of the, I had contacts in and I had a cigarette. I had to figure out how to blow smoke rings. I YouTubed that. I had all of these things going on. But what I remember so much is the community and the communication and the love and the feeling of everything in Des Moines, which I love. It's just such a special place. But that things just keep kind of going and we keep doing what we're doing. I've been fortunate enough to be able to just keep doing what I love to do.
Well, thank you. We look forward to having you back. And Sara, you've been many places with a potential move in your future, but you've also had a chance to revisit this part a little bit too. Can you speak to your experiences since Rusalka?
Yes, well, I got to return to Iowa last summer to sing Marie and Vodník, which was one of the most incredible artistic experiences next to Rusalka, but Vodník was deliciously amazing. It was the scariest thing I've ever done in my whole life on stage, and it ended up being one of the most gratifying. And I had the chance to step in for a performance of Rusalka at the Canadian Opera Company in a totally different production, but that was a thrill to be able to put her on again. But right now, I'm here in my home in Dallas, Texas, and baking a lot of cookies and taking care of my 4.5-year-old. My husband is an administrator in the arts, and we're getting ready to move to Germany next year, which we were in the process of knowing all that last summer, but I wasn't at liberty to discuss it. So, but we're really excited and scared, and there's a lot of I think amazing things that are in our future. We just got to take it one day at a time.
And Maestro, I want to ask you a little bit of a variation on that question. You and the orchestra have covered a lot of different repertory over the last several seasons, many of which people will get to hear in the virtual festival on our broadcast. What is it like for you to prepare the musicians for so many different styles of music, whether that's Massenet or Dvorak or Benjamin Britten? Those are some varying things. How do you approach that work with the orchestra?
Well, interesting question. That it starts with the study and the preparation on one's own time, right? With the score preparation that starts usually well in advance. For Rusalka, I'd been to Prague many times, and one of the first operas 3 decades ago that I conducted was Janáček, Cunning Little Vixen, and I've always felt drawn to Czech music. But for me, I had a sabbatical 3 years ago now, but 2 years in advance of Rusalka, where I spent a few months in Czech Republic, acclimatizing myself and just absorbing kind of the feel of the language, of course, and things like that. And then bringing that to the space, and at Des Moines, we don't have the luxury of a lot of rehearsal time with the orchestra. People marvelously show up really performance ready and ready to simply rehearse and talk about like the things you suggest. Style, how do we approach this? And they're very, very good at filling in the blanks. You a couple of basic principles, and they're such wonderful musicians that they know what to do with that. It's kind of magic at Des Moines.
And also tell us a little bit about what you've been doing in the last time since we've caught up with you.
I've moved a few times. So when I started Rusalka, I had just moved to Bloomington, Indiana. I had I had a 2-year visiting professorship there. And in August, I moved after Vodník and Candide in Des Moines. I moved to the Washington, D.C. area. I'm in Hyattsville, Maryland, and I am the head of orchestral studies at the University of Maryland. I just finished a better part of a semester teaching online, spending the summer with my fellow ensemble colleagues, figuring out how we can offer something meaningful to students enrolled in a large ensemble who are not able to get together in large numbers. And that's one of our great challenges right now.
I think that's a challenge that's pretty common amongst musicians and opera companies alike. Even though we're not able to get together, it's so wonderful to see all of you here today. And I thank you for being willing to be with us and to devote time with us to catch up and to reminisce. Congratulations on all of the things that all of you have done since this production of Rusalka. And thank you for being a part of a very special memory for me and for the company. We look forward to being able to share it with a much broader audience through this virtual festival. Thank you all for being here today.
Thank you.
Great to see all of you.
Great to see everybody.
Yes.